This is Closereads.
A philosophy podcast with Mark and Wes.
I'm Wes Alwan.
And I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. Hey, let us follow up on the partially examined life recent episode on Josiah Royce. That's episode 380. I don't think people will have had to listen to that, but I'm sure we'll pull things back here to read a little more from the book we covered in that episode, The Problem of Christianity, which is not really about Christianity, at least not the part that we're going to talk about. And you had recommended, Wes, you had looked ahead to this is in volume 2, lecture 9, chapter 9, which is talking about the will to interpret, and specifically how community, as he's talked about in the rest of the book, works in how we relate to each other. We had said in the other episode that people share a common sense of history, for instance. They send a common purpose in what we're doing right now, but we still have to then understand each other. We have to be able to interpret each other. So I think that's what we're going to address here. Any preliminary words?
No.
Well, why did you read the
didn't
whole
recommend
second
this.
volume?
Huh?
Well, you had put on our syllabus, oh, this part is also really good.
No, it was just part of the original reading.
Really?
Yeah. No, I didn't recommend this.
The rest of us just ignored somehow. Okay. We have to do some slack sleuthing.
Why would I just like randomly pick out some?
That's why I'm asking the question.
No, I mean, I responded to one of it was originally within the recommendation, and then I think you asked people if they were going to get to it. Yeah, it was part of the original reading.
Okay, well, there's some mystery to this, but I guess it's probably within Kara, our partial guest for the episode, within her recommended. But to me, when we got to this, I don't know, the way that you sort of represented, here are, you had found new versions of the text for us from what she had provided, and had created the Slack entry that then we were leading off of. The way that I read it was, okay, we're reading these parts. Oh, this part is also good. So I thought it was just something you had found. Anyway, we're going to, she was pretty spot on in terms of figuring out things that would elucidate this concept of community, even though we didn't really get a good idea either of what his whole project was about Christianity. I mean, we know he said a lot of things about why the Christian community, the ideal community, the future community that doesn't exist yet, of peace on earth and goodwill among all peoples, why that doesn't exist yet. And we also didn't find out at all, and I wouldn't mind doing a future reading on this, what an absolute pragmatist means. We saw a few elements of pragmatism. We know that he's, like Hegel, concerned with God in some sense, but I still have no indication. Anyway, when I was reading this at the time, and I did read through this, and then actually looked at it again a couple nights ago very quickly, it seemed like a different topic, but we can, and I didn't actually see what the big deal was about it. So I thought you had found some special value in this.
No, so what happened is, so I'm just looking back at Slack. It's in the original reading, and then you said, should I tell the guests that we're formally adding section 9 to 12 of the will to interpret, because she had given us a set amount of reading, and then she said, and this is also good.
She said that. Okay, so you were just pasting her comment.
Yeah, and then and then you said, is it part of the same narrative? If not, let's leave it out. And I don't think anyone. Oh, I just responded, I read it, and then no one else responded. So that was my recommendation.
I was like, of course you read it. You're the one who recommended it. So we had a hermeneutic. We had a problem of
you have me
interpretation.
confused with Kara there.
We had a problem of interpretation right in our own.
She's the one. Oh, did it freeze?
We're definitely frozen. Your face is not moving. Oh, now it's okay.
All right.
Well, let's get going.
It's just, yeah.
This is page 204 or PDF 204. Maybe I'll make a special PDF of just this chunk that we cover to post for people, as I often do. Please proceed, Wes.
Our lengthy study of comparison and interpretation, as they are present in the inner life of the individual man, has prepared us for a new view of the social meaning of the will to interpret. Here I must once more take a temporary leave of Peirce's guidance, and
Yep.
trust to my own resources. One who compares a pair of his own ideas may attain, if he is successful, that vision of unity, that grade of self-possession, which we have now illustrated. But one who understands to interpret his neighbor's idea, one who undertakes to interpret his neighbor's ideas, is in a different position. We're
And
going
of
to have
course,
to
we
keep
didn't
going
read.
before this
Yeah,
makes sense, but yeah.
well, we didn't read the previous chapters within or the sections within this lecture, so we don't really know what he has in mind. But he'd already started in the parts we had read, talking about how we interpret ourselves through our own past, and I thought that the social was also built into that, in a very Hegelian sense that I don't. To determine what are the significant events in my life, I don't just take my word for it. How do people describe me? How do my parents describe me? How do my having my siblings still living and able to talk with them about, a part of yourself is retained. So it seemed like our notion of ourselves as a continuous being and, not just the momentary uh, Humean, Sartrean instant point that is unconnected to a past. That's not really the self. The self is invariably social. So why do we need this additional section? I'm interested.
In general, as we've seen, an interpreter in his social relations with other men deals with two different minds, neither of which he identifies with his own. His interpretation is a third or mediating idea. This third is aroused in the interpreter's mind through signs which come to him from the mind that he interprets. He addresses this third to the mind to which he interprets the first. So this is this is interesting because we might think of interpretation primarily as the relationship between a reader and a text, for instance, or a relationship between me and some other person if I'm interpreting them. But here, the interpretation is to another. I'm interpreting, right? So if I do interpret a text, I'm doing that for another prospective reader of my interpretation or hearer of my interpretation. Um, it's a little less clear when I'm doing that with another person's mind if I'm interpreting what's going on in their head. But at least in fantasy, right? If I'm having an inner monologue, I'm interpreting to a third in fantasy, perhaps.
Well, and it's interesting that this is sort of missing in what we read in Hegel, in that part of the formation of yourself is I am observing you and I'm saying what I'm seeing and I'm providing that interpretation to you. But of course, we know how this can be pretty warped. That the gaslighting, the that if it's really just a couple with no third party therapist or anything like that getting involved, then they can inflict very strange roles upon each other that would not stand up
Yep.
to the light of day. But as we were just discussing in our previous close reads here, when you appeal to reason, you are appealing to something that certainly needs at least three. You need it can't just be the fucked up thing that you and I have agreed that we're doing here. It has to be to refer to something that is an indefinite number of additional people could run through the same chain of reasoning and say, yep, that's right. So that's just the way science works. It seems to be the way reason works in general. And so interpretation, even just saying, what did you mean by that? Well, let me post on the internet. Am I the asshole? Like, here's what the
Yeah.
person, the gesture, what they said to me. Here's how I interpret it. Is that right?
Yeah. I like your example of the couple, though, or the dyad, where we are always interpreting people's minds back to them. Normally we think of that as, reflection or something, or the mirroring. involved in recognition, and a la Hegel, people to come to know their own minds through our interpretations of them. And as you pointed out, that could be a kind of gaslighting ultimately, and even if it doesn't rise to that level, we are trying to put people into roles often, or we have a narrative. We have I think people often they have a very strong narrative about the world that they're not aware of, and it's almost like they're constantly proselytizing, like they're preachers. They're always asserting their thesis, and in that thesis, we always have a role. So they're trying to tell us who we are. Often, they're trying to interpret us back to ourselves in a not just in a way that tells us what's there, but in a way that influences us to fulfill that role. Um, Psychoanalysts call this projective identification, but yeah, to kind of mold people in the image that, and according to the thesis that we have about the world and about other people. So I think I mean, the larger point is that this idea of three, right? The mind of the interpreter, the mind of the interpreted, and then the mind of the one who's being interpreted, the one we're interpreting for, this third person, um, they can be collapsed, I think, in practice into two people who are interacting. But should we
So
go?
the wording though that he uses here is not about three people. It is the interpretation. So what is this? The
Yeah.
interpretation, a string of symbols, a thought is a third or mediating idea. This third is aroused in the interpreter's mind through signs which come to him from that mind that he interprets. So you're making some motions and I kind of process them and I create, let's say, a document that I think, he's saying I'm drowning. And so he addresses the third to the mind which he interprets first. So I show, is that right? Are you
Interprets the
drowning?
first. So
What? Yeah, Twitch interprets the first. Is that different? Is there three?
um
Because
so I
it
think
doesn't
the
seem like
three
there are three
I think I'm
ideas.
relying on what happens later since I've read
Okay.
this.
Yep.
But here, yeah, it is a little bit unclear. So we have two different minds. There's an interpreter with an interpretation, and this interpretation is a third or mediating idea. And then presumably he's interpreting something else. And I think the something else will be another person, whether, has embodied in a text or, their speech. But the third, the in this particular paragraph, the third is just the idea, right, that comes into the interpreter's mind.
Hmm.
Um, so, but there is this, so they come to him through the mind that he interprets. So here we are getting, I think we're already getting the idea of a third person whose mind we are interpreting. So we're gonna take another person's mind and then interpret that to a third person who is actually the second person. The third person is the one we're interpreting. Anyway, who's on first?
All right, let's keep going. The psychology of the
Um,
process of social interpretation, so far as that process goes on in the interpreter's individual mind, is identical with that psychology of comparison, which we have now outlined. Nobody can interpret unless the idea which he interprets has become more or less clearly and explicitly one of his own ideas, and unless he compares it with another idea which is in some sense his own. Uh, so we are again referring to something that happened earlier in the lecture, which we can easily imagine as being kind of what is the process of explicit thinking. It's like you're putting a list of pros and cons. You're setting one idea and you're placing another idea next to it and you're making a comparison. And even though it seems like, well, that's all just going on in my mind, if I'm going to do it involving another person, well, it still has to be reduced to that. Like whatever interpretation I have of you, I don't compare my inner idea with you directly. I compare it with the third, with the interpretation.
Yeah, I think the simplest case is someone is saying something to me, and I already have to have my own ideas for whatever he's transmitting to make sense. I have to have a receiver. Um, and so that's the point of comparison. If he's using the word dog, um, I have to be able to compare it to what's going on in my own mind in a sense. I think that's what he's talking about. Um, but we'll see as we go on.
Yes. And we can already see, given that, how we could fail to understand each other. If the thing that you are saying resembles something that's in my lexicon, but actually isn't what you meant, then I'm going to make a mistake there. If it is
Hmm.
just baffling to me, if I have nothing in my lexicon to compare it to, then I can't, it's just nonsense. I'm going to interpret it as a string of nonsense. Well, I have that in my lexicon. These two strings of nonsense both look like nonsense.
And then there's plenty of them in between cases where, for instance, you take Hegel and it's a string of nonsense. But if you try to find enough points of comparison, you might be able to decipher it. So there's coded stuff that can be deciphered, but it takes work. So the
Well, and
interpretation can be work in that sense. Yeah.
and I don't know, maybe we should do this in the public nightcap a little bit. And I don't want to get us on a tangent here, but I think it obviously really important, the thing that you were talking about, why a pure idealism doesn't make any sense, why you need to bring the data in from something objective. So, all the alleged subjectivisms, um, if it's a good philosopher, they're actually still are using some objectivity. So Berkeley idealism is not scary. Kantian idealism is not scary. They're not, in fact, some solipsistic, pure subjectivism at all. But we sort of left that, and I might have to just re-listen to that episode as I posted this week, uh, with my thinking. Oh, this was we received some very ambiguous input from Hegel, and this just clicked on the subroutine of
Hmm.
this point that you find very important and is at least in the neighborhood of what he was talking about. And we left that episode with me saying, I don't actually see how you got that out. I can see why you were reminded of it, but I don't actually see Hegel saying that. So I think this might be one way in which, you know, uh, in fact, I had another guy, the PVI episode that I just released. This is a guy who's like, I'm very into deep listening, expressive listening. And whenever you say something, then I'll pounce on it. And I noticed then when I sort of objected to something that he said, uh, that he interpreted it as just affirming what he said, and he continued saying
Hmm.
what he was saying. So he actually wasn't deep listening at all in terms of actually responding. He was interpreting everything through the framework of the idea, the pre-existing idea. I think
Yeah,
we're
I
all
think with
guilty of
someone
that,
like Hegel, we're dealing with a text which is so difficult that we're making guesses. And then
for sure.
it is pretty clear he's talking about the history of philosophy, right? So it's not crazy to try and to 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 speculate. Okay, he's talking about Kant, or he's talking about Berkeley, or he's talking about so and so. And sometimes, I think we are jumping back and forth. Who the fuck is he talking about, right? And
Yep.
then interpreting him as if he were talking to that person. And in any case, so that's what I did with the my critique about objectivity is based in or my interpretation in terms of objectivity is based in what I know about Kant and Hegel's relation to Kant. And once I decided, I decided kind of Hegel was jumping onto a critique that had been made by others after Kant and that had been picked up by the tradition of German idealism. Now, is that what he was doing in that paragraph? Who knows?
Right.
Does anyone
Right.
know? I'm sure someone somewhere knows. And I would love to read that interpretation. But yeah.
And I think at
Uh,
the beginning of that episode or the previous episode, I made some sort of lofty cosmological thing, uh, that you were like, okay, yeah, I think that's going to be relevant to his project, but that's not what this paragraph is about. And so we're definitely, Hegel especially invites that, in that he has microcosms that echo the macrocosm. Like that's just the way his system is built, is that the overall logic that he's using in a particular section is going to be the logic that, is what he calls logic, is going to be his whole metaphysical picture. So, it invites that.
yeah. And I think, the Bible, which is, I think, part of what Royce is thinking about, right, is going to be one of these texts where exegesis, you're going to have to work hard to get the meaning out of the dietary restrictions and the stoning and the mass murder, at least in the Old Testament. It's not
Well,
as hard with the Jesus, who's pretty clear in many ways, but although has the parables. But yeah, you have to work really hard to make sense of a text like that for religious and ethical purposes.
and when I was writing the description for the Royce episode on the website, I ran into this issue of so who is the leader of the church? uh, that on his own account of community, you need a leader to provide sort of the primary interpretation to say Jesus died for your sins. And the way he's outlining it is actually Paul. Paul
Mm,
was the guy historically that created this doctrine, or at least infused it into. I don't know, maybe he didn't invent it, but he infused it into the believers of Jesus died for your sins, and this is so. Paul was the spiritual leader, but according to all the believers, it is Jesus who is the leader. Paul was like, "Oh, this is not me. This is Jesus himself." And and Jesus is the people don't
mm,
pray to Paul now.
mm,
Uh, and in the Freud that we're reading, he brings up this idea of the church as a group with Jesus as the nominal leader. Of course, he's not telling us anything right now, right? We only have the Bible. We only have the interpretations of the people who wrote the Bible, of the people of the clergy, the Catholic Church or whatever, who are giving us this. But
mm.
Freud tells this from this, I guess, novel of his time that of somebody discovering evidence that Joseph of Arimathea moved Jesus's body, and so there was no, from the tomb. So there was
Mm.
no, the Jesus must have risen. Like, no, it's actually documented that he just moved the body and he buried it somewhere else for various reasons. And this causes a giant rupture, a breakdown in this group cohesion because they're leaderless.
Yeah, this was a novel. Um, this whole this story was a popular novel at the time, but Freud's time. So I think what you're getting at is very important because some interpretations are commandments, basically, right? If I'm the Pope or the clergy, I'm engaged in an act of interpretation, which is ultimately the results of that interpretation yield ethical imperatives, and I'm telling people what to do, basically. And when I tell them what to do, I'm saying, oh, it's not me. I'm just interpreting the word of God. I am a conduit for that. I'm as interpreter, right? I'm in this weird position of being a leader, but just channeling some other authority.
Well, it's also just interesting the ways in which people try to transcend their time in terms of to fix their leadership, to say, here is the covenant. I'm your leader right now and can boss you around, but I'm not going to be around 40 years from now. So we're going to set up this constitution, we're going to set up this covenant, we're going to
Hmm.
say I was never the leader all along. It's actually this thing in this book. It's your direct conduit to God. So keep following the rules that I set out for you. uh Look, these
Yeah, well,
stone tablets.
in our constitutional republic, right? The Constitution, in a sense, is supposed to be the leader, and we want the leader not just to be a person, but we want it to be this document, and also we want it to be the role, right? It's the role of the presidency, which is in a way the leader, and then particular people fill that role. But ultimately, the Constitution, and then so the one of the most important activities becomes interpretation of that text, which is what the Supreme Court does. So we don't know what we're allowed to do and or what our rights are exactly until the Supreme Court tells us, interprets this document back to us, which we can change, but it takes a lot of work to do that.
But from the point of view of the interpreter, the essential difference between the
Wait.
case, is that where we are? We're in the second paragraph, right?
Um,
205.
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
But from the point of view of the interpreter, the essential difference between the case where he is interpreting the mind of one of his neighbors to the mind of another neighbor, and the case wherein he's comparing two ideas of his own, is a difference in the clearness of vision, which is, under human conditions, attainable. When I compare two ideas of my own, the luminous self-possession, which then for a time may come to be mine, forms for me an ideal of success in interpretation. This ideal I can attain only at moments, but these moments set a model for all my interpretations to follow. So this sounds like Cartesian clearness and distinctness.
Yeah. Well, I'm engaged in, so it sounds here, right? So he does give us the kind of model he's operating on, interpreting the mind of one of his neighbors to the mind of another neighbor. But I might be interpreting the mind of my neighbor back to myself, in which case I'm playing two roles in this situation. And in that case, or I might be interpreting, I'm not sure here, might be interpreting my own mind to someone else when I communicate. Right. So if I'm interpreting my own mind to someone else, then there's certainly some kind of luminousness that might be incorrigibility, right? To to although in the 20th and 21st century, we've come to, right, we have a hermeneutics of suspicion now, and we doubt incorrigibility, and we say, oh, actually, people are bad interpreters of themselves to others. But I think for Royce, we might we're at least better interpreters of ourselves to others than we are of one person to another person to a third person.
Yeah, without knowing what examples that he uses in the earlier sections of this chapter, I couldn't really say.
Yeah,
It just sounds to me
I think
like
it becomes clear as we go.
I'm not necessarily interpreting my own mind, which you're right, might involve all sorts of psychoanalytic pitfalls, uh, but that I've gotten two ideas in my head somehow, and I can interpret them. That I can definitely say this dog is like this other dog. They're both dogs. I'm absolutely sure of that. So I'm just sort of thinking on these naturalistic or how Descartes would. Obviously, it's clear that 2 + 2 and 4. Oh, what luminosity I have about those. Once you get to the natural world, well, is that really a dog or is that a fox? Is that we're not considering essences so directly.
Yeah. So for instance, we might be talking about judgment here. So he's talking about comparison, which sounds very Lockean. But if I have a perception or a series of perceptions and I bring that under a concept, dog, right? I mean, that sounds according, you can give a Lockean associationist psychology of that, which sounds very much related to what he's talking about when he talks about comparison. So I think you might, if this is what you were saying, I think, yeah, you might be right. So it might be as simple as someone bringing some particular under a concept. That's an act of interpretation. Is it a dog or is it not a dog? Um, but I do think he's going to keep up this three mind model. But we'll see. Yeah.
206.
When I endeavor to interpret my neighbor's mind, my interpretation has to remain remote from its goal. The luminous vision of the results of comparison comes to me, at best, only partially and with uncertainty. My neighbor's ideas I need in a measure
Indeed.
I indeed in a measure grasp and compare with other ideas and interpret. But as I do this, I see through a glass darkly. Only those ideas whose comparisons with other ideas and whose resulting triadic interpretations I can view face to face can appear to me to have become, in a more intimate and complete sense, my own individual ideas. Okay, that's a little bit confusing, but I'm going to just read on a little bit.
Sure.
I possess certain ideas sufficiently to enable me to seek for their interpretation, but so that, try as I will, I can never clearly survey, as from above, the success of any of my attempted interpretations. Then, these ideas remain, from my own point of view, ideas that can never become wholly my own. Therefore, these relatively alien ideas can be interpreted at all only by using the familiar hypothesis that they belong to the self of someone else. Under the ordinary social conditions, this other mind is viewed as the mind of my neighbor. Neither of my neighbor nor of myself have I any direct intuition, but of my own ideas I can hope to win the knowledge which the most successful comparisons exemplify. Of my neighbor's ideas I can never win, under human conditions, any interpretation but one which remains hypothetical and which is never observed under those human conditions as face to face with its own object or with the idea of the other neighbors to whom the interpretation is addressed. So I can't get directly into people's minds and have their thoughts, right? Uh, and but and to interpret them, I have to assume that they have a mind like my own. We do all this all the time with motivation and behavior, right? We're always predicting that, roughly speaking, other people are motivated like myself, right? If they're putting a cheeseburger under their mouth, and it's because they're hungry, and I know what hunger feels like, so I can interpret their hunger back to myself. But if they were a being nothing like me, if their minds were nothing like my own, that whole project would fail. But
I'm not sure. So obviously with simple things, so somebody is uh, gesturing in a way that I interpret as help. Once
mhm.
I make that interpretation, that's as clear as can be. Like the concept of help, I can compare with other, well, so what does this mean I should do? How does it look like they really need help? Does it look like they just would like a little help? How desperate do they look? There's a lot that I can compare. Uh, the only glass darkly part is, am I actually sure that that was a sign for help, or are they just having fun in the water? Uh, when I possess certain ideas sufficiently to enable me to seek for their interpretation, but so that try as I will, I can never clearly survey as from above the success of my attempted interpretations. I mean, generally, the success of your social interpretations, especially if he's a pragmatist. Uh, does the person when I exhibit my interpretation back to the person, do they say, "Yeah, that's what I meant"? Of course, they could be misinterpreting what I say, or they could be saying yes just to be amenable or something like that. And in fact, they don't want to just, oh, they've just explained some complicated thing, some problem, and then I deliver some oversimplified soup back to them, and they're just sort of out of disgust agreeing with me. But generally, it seems like for pragmatic purposes, we do get to survey the success of interpretation.
Yeah, and that's what he's saying. He's giving a hypothetical here where, right, we have these alien ideas, that there's alien ideas in another person, and if it were the case that he couldn't survey the success of his interpretations, then these ideas would never become wholly his own. But they can become his own. The relatively alien ideas can be interpreted by using the more familiar hypothesis that they belong to the self of someone else. This and that self. My interpretation of this is that he means that that self is someone like me. So the ideas are not alien, right? And I can survey their success in this way that you're talking about pragmatically, if I make this assumption that the other has a mind like mine. So, under ordinary social conditions, the other mind is viewed as the mind of my neighbor. We
So
can't
you're
intuit each
interpreting
other's.
neighbor as being like yours.
Well, as the paragraph goes on, I don't have any direct intuition of my neighbor's mind. Um, I, the interpretation always is hypothetical. It's never face to face. Yeah, maybe I'm thinking about, maybe it's just the fact that I've read this and I'm formed an opinion of it, that I'm interpreting these paragraphs in terms of what comes in the future. But yeah,
Sure, sure.
yeah.
Because so far I could interpret it as the other is irreducibly other. There's always going to be something merely hypothetical about what I think that they are thinking.
Well,
The
I think
best that
that's
I can
true
do,
also. But yeah,
yes, the best that I can do is look through the glass darkly. Their ideas will never become wholly my own, so I just have to say they're just somebody else's ideas. That's the way that I make them familiar, in that, of course, I'm familiar with other people existing and having their own ideas, so I don't have to forever see them as alien incursions, but they are never actually my own ideas.
um,
That's just a different take on that.
yeah. So that's okay. Maybe, yeah. So maybe I'm
Let's keep
wrong. Let's look at
going.
the sentence. Therefore, these relatively alien ideas can be interpreted only by using the familiar hypothesis that they belong to the self of someone else. So this could be interpreted as saying that the whole process of interpretation includes this idea of the impenetrable otherness of others. Um, Whereas I just want to bulldoze through that and say, oh, and actually we can in this way get into another person's mind through interpretation, even though we can't directly experience their thoughts. Anyway, yeah, both are true in a way. We'll figure out what I think. You're right. It's a little unclear which of these horns of the dilemma he's emphasizing here.
The will to interpret is in our social relations. Is that where we are, right?
Yeah.
In our social relations, guided by a purpose which we are now ready to bring into close relations with the most significant of all ethical ideas, which in our foregoing lectures we have portrayed. The interpreter, the mind to which he addresses his interpretation, the mind which he undertakes to interpret, all these appear in our explicitly human and social world as three distinct selves, sundered by chasms which, under human conditions, we never cross, and contrasting in their inner lives in whatever way the motives of men at any moment chance to contrast. The will to interpret undertakes to make of these three selves a community. So will and interpret are capitalized there. The will to interpret, to make these three a community, in every case of ideally serious and loyal effort, truly to interpret this as this is the simplest, but in its deepest motives, the most purely spiritual of possible communities. Let us view that simple and ideal community as the interpreter himself views it, precisely insofar as he is sincere and truth-loving in his purpose as interpreter.
Um, yeah. So in that previous paragraph, he does seem to be saying there's right, there's these chasms that we can't cross. But I'm still a little bit unclear. In any case, I think the will to interpret, I think he's making a little reference there to William James's will
Yep.
to believe.
Yeah.
They were in constant dialogue with each other, and they were neighbors and good friends up here in old Cambridge, both at Harvard at the same time. So I don't know a tremendous amount about that back and forth, but I think yeah, he's got William James in mind here.
So it's faith that is the other people are
Mm.
separate from me, but I am going to assume, maybe by the very logical leap that you just pointed out, that you are enough like me that we can understand each other, that when you think about Jesus and I think about Jesus, we are inspired in the same way. We are driven
Or
by a common
cheeseburger or anything really.
purpose.
Inspired by a cheeseburger in the same way, but or that we see it in the, as a perceptual object, as the same object. But yeah, this is like another minds problem where you can say, yeah, there's this huge uncrossable chasm. I can't get into your mind. But you can also say, if I make a certain assumption about the similarity of our minds, then I can assume that I, I can at least get into your mind well enough for us to communicate and that therefore to be part of a community.
It is in its deepest motives, the most purely spiritual of possible communities, this will to interpret. I mean, this doesn't sound very pragmatic. Pragmatism to me would say good enough. Like we don't have to have the same interpretation of a lot of things. We have to have a similar enough interpretation that it motivates the same sort of actions.
So
But
what is,
clearly, yeah,
yeah, what did James say in the will to believe? We don't, the whole God thing is something about empirical evidence is not going to settle that question, so we can settle for ourselves on a pragmatic basis whether or not we're going to believe in God. It's a little bit like Pascal's wager, right? Whether you have nothing to lose by believing, but if you have a lot to lose by not believing, if you're going to end up in hell. In the pragmatist case, you have a lot to lose by not believing if your life is going to be much worse off for not believing. So if evidence can't settle the question either way, then we might as well believe. And here, if there is an echo here, and this is pure speculation, but we we have to make this right, assumption, we can't ever know that other minds even exist, right? That just that old philosophical problems, much less that what's going on them in them is anything like what's going on in our minds. But we're better off making that leap of faith and assuming that there are other minds and that there's the possibility of communication and therefore a possibility of community because there it's a grounds for the possibility of community. We can't really participate in a community unless we make this leap of faith about the interpretability ability of other minds.
I want to keep going on chapter 10 there, section 10.
Sure. I, the interpreter, regard you, my neighbor, as a realm of ideas, of leadings, of meanings, of pursuits, of purposes, of cheeseburgers. Just kidding, sorry. This realm is not wholly strange and incomprehensible to me. For at any moment in my life as interpreter, I am dependent upon the results of countless previous efforts to interpret. The whole past history of civilization has resulted in that form and degree of interpretation of you and my other fellow men, which I already possess, at any instant when I begin afresh the task of interpreting your life or your ideas. You are to me, then, a realm of ideas which lie outside of the center, which my will to interpret can momentarily illumine with the clearest grade of vision. But I am discontent with my narrowness and with your estrangement. I seek unity with you. And since the same will to interpret you is also expressive of my analogous interests in all my other neighbors, that I here and now specifically aim, what I here and now specifically aim to do is this. I mean to interpret you to somebody else, to some other neighbor, who is neither yourself nor myself. Three of us, then, I seek to bring into the desired unity of interpretation. Why is the neighbor, why is this triad thing so important to him?
Yeah, that seems to go against the Aristophanes. We just want to merge with another single individual. No, we want to merge into, this is what I was getting at in this ideal Christian community toward the end of the part that we discussed on the Partially Examined Life episode. Right, the community does not involve a mystical blending. We know that. That's the way he's defined community. You don't have to give up your individuality, but it has the will to some sort of mystical blending. That's kind of what we want to get. We're making this leap, like the will to believe, to believe that we share the same ideas and interpretations. I know that you're a separate person. I know that I'm not going to merge with you. And so maybe that's the difference, is that because he recognizes that merging is not actually possible, it means that because it's going to use this mediating term of interpretation, that has to be something that is essentially public. It's not me and you merging, it's us merging around an idea, a mediating idea.
Yeah. I think, the way at the beginning of this recording, I was thinking in terms of that his idea is that, right, even if it's just me and you, if I'm interpreting your mind to myself, then there's an implicit third in there. Right, because in a way I'm divided into two in that situation. And that implicit third it does seem to have something to do with society in general or the symbolic order in general, because he does seem to appeal to that here, right? So civilization, there's a whole history of those efforts, my own personal history and the history of civilization itself. We inherit a whole bunch of artifacts that we use for interpretation. So a leather jacket, right, means something. You only know what it means, can only be interpreted in terms of the current social norms. So we inherit this whole interpretive frame, this whole interpretive apparatus. Language is the most simple version of that. What does this particular word mean? But there's all sorts of more subtle social connotations and symbolism around us. So again, I'm speculating, but I would say that the third is also society or culture as a whole, but
Well,
or
or
language. You could call it language itself, or yeah.
the particular community that I'm trying to will into existence. I guess that's a interesting distinction, right? The way that I was talking about reason as a touch point for Hegel, in which you and I can understand each other in light of this. That actually reason is not local. I was actually saying, oh, this is the Platonic reason. It extends everywhere. And you're saying society or culture as a whole, which, yeah, language. We don't know how many people speak the language, right? Obviously, not everybody speaks this language, but it's sort of an indefinite mass. Whereas he seems to have here the will to interpret as I want to build this specific community. So not referring to the whole or the indefinite, but the very, perhaps a community that can only be defined, and this is not Royce, by its opposition to other communities, right? Isn't that something Freud sort of throws into the mix and, is a common sense people like you don't actually have a community unless you have outsiders.
Um, this is what you're interpreting Freud as saying.
I don't remember. I'm still in the middle of taking my
Okay,
notes
I'd have to
on
go
the group
look at my
psychology book.
notes.
But just to bring in right, we've seen this in some of our philosophy of race stuff that, and interestingly, our guest, when, we were emailing about this, she's like, I'm going to have to talk about Royce's known racism. And I Googled a little bit about this, and she obviously didn't get around, she was not on the recording long enough to get into this. And I didn't see it as central. I thought it was just like, well, of course, everybody from this time period is racist. Like, why do you have to go into that? That's just so woke to feel like you have to include that. Um, but if it got me thinking, at least, just like for Heidegger, well, do you really have to go into his, okay, well, maybe there's something about his Volk psychology that connotes this. Uh, is there something about uh, Royce's emphasis on community that says, right, actually, the third, this is not Royce's view, but this is, I remember some of these philosophy of race guys, maybe this was in, I don't even remember who I'm thinking of specifically, but the third is the outsider. So I'm related to you only insofar as we have then set a dividing line of somebody who is over there. Like, I don't know that I see that here.
Well, I think you're onto something because the two ideas are interrelated, right? So if I am a nationalist and I have this and I idealize my particular nation or maybe, ethno-nationalist conception of my nation, then that relationship to my own idealized society is predicated upon a demonized other. Ideal you to sort of amp up your connection, your nationalist connection to a community, you do need, right, to be superior to some other community. Here, right, when he took, so this, as I've said many times before, I think Orwell's distinction is very useful between patriotism and nationalism, where patriotism, you care about your community. Nationalism, you need it to be superior to others because you want to feel superior by identifying with that community. They're often very hard to tease apart, right? When does love of nation become nationalism in the pejorative sense? It's unclear, but you could postulate that, yeah, you could have a love of community, a loyalty, as Royce famously puts it, which doesn't necessarily demonize others. That's the idea. Now, I think that some people don't think that's possible today. Some theorists say there is no way to relate to your nation in that way, as a patriot without also being a nationalist.
Well, I don't even know if notions of superiority have to be involved in just demarcating your group. Just like we'd say, we define the self in part by saying, well, I'm not you. So I'm defining this group by just saying we are not them. And certainly there are lots of groups, right? We talked about in our social construction of race episode that like, well, why does somebody that is like 1/16th black and looks a little black identify the same as somebody who is, straight from Africa, very, very dark? Well, that's because it has been defined externally, this one drop rule. So there's no reason that those people would have some sort of natural affinity, but because they are driven by a literal outsider who is labeling them as one group. So why would LGBTQ plus? That's like a lot of different things. Why would they all feel like they're one group? It's not, entirely their own mutual support for each other. It's right.
Mm.
Somebody who's asexual. What? Why are they going to be
Mm.
like, yay, trans, yay, just, but because they are similarly, discriminated against.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if you're asexual and you're jumping on into that group, you're a hop on. You haven't paid your fare.
It would be interesting to talk to somebody who knows the history of the growth of this. The like, when did the A get on there? Was it actual A people being like, we want to be recognized too, or was it like some scholar who was like, well, this is also somebody that people, and then A was just
Right.
leave this alone. Just
Stop
nobody
trying to
will
have
miss us if we're not at
sex
the
with me.
party.
Stop assuming I'm a sexual being. That's my problem. Everyone's always trying to have sex with me. All right. So, but yeah, I think you're onto something important. And yeah, we don't have to think of this in terms of superiority. We could just think of, do we need, in order to define the group, to say what's not right, that these others are not me. But anyway, shall we continue?
Yeah, bottom of 209. Is that where we
Now, if
are?
I could succeed Now, if I could succeed in interpreting you to another man as fully as, in my clearest moments, I interpret one of my ideas to another.
That's different than what he
Um,
said before. I thought he said compare to another. I interpret one of my ideas to another. That's
does he
weird.
mean
Okay.
another person? I
Oh,
think
oh,
so. Yeah,
oh,
like when I
yes. Okay.
communicate with someone.
Yes,
Yeah,
of course.
I interpret one of my ideas to another. My process of interpretation would simply reduce to a conscious comparison of ideas. Right. Yeah. So if talking to another person were just like talking to myself in my mind, then it would just be like associationist psychology, right? I would just like being comparing my own ideas in my head. I should then attain, as I succeeded in my interpretation, a luminous vision of your ideas, of my own, and of the ideas of the one to whom I interpret you. This vision would look, so in other words, interpreting your ideas to another person would just be like me communicating with that person. This vision would look down, as it were, from above. In light of it, we, the selves now sundered by the chasms of the social world, should indeed not interpenetrate. For our functions as the mind interpreted, the mind to whom the other is interpreted, and the interpreter would remain as distinct as now they are. There would be no melting together, no blending, no mystic blur, and no lapse into mere intuition. But for me, the vision of the successful interpretation would simply be the attainment of my own goal as interpreter. This attainment would as little confound our persons as it would divide our substance. We should remain, for me, many, even when viewed in this unity. So
Not
he's trying to do
sure.
the Royce thing, and we're still all separate. We're not merging, but we can communicate. That's, I think, the general upshot.
Yeah, we should get back to these sort of extended theories of mind, where my mind is not just my own Cartesian space, but is the social. So, like, this is actually the way minds do interpenetrate. We're running the same software. We're hooked up to the same, if we're cogitating the same idea space, then we are in some not mystical way, but like in a very ordinary way, part of the same system here. This is as opposed to
Yeah, but
us being separated by a chasm and throwing idea volleyballs to each other. That
I
I
think I think he would agree with you, except that he would say, and I would agree that, when you get a paper cut, I don't go, ouch. Now
Sure.
I can understand when you say ouch, and I can, that's certainly been communicated to me, but having that communicated to me successfully is not the same thing as me feeling it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if his opponents here are the Emersonians or whatever, like, yeah, okay, I see how this is different. Sure. Yet this vision, if I could win it, would constitute an event wherein your will to be interpreted would also be fulfilled. For if you are indeed ready to accept my service as interpreter, you even now possess this will to be interpreted. And if there exists the one to whom I can interpret you, that other also wills that you should be interpreted to him, and that I should be the interpreter. I mean, is that really true that everybody has to be willing? Like it seems like if you say something to me and I know your language, it's very hard for me to simply not hearken to you.
Yeah, I don't get this either, except in terms of the speculation that I made about it being related to James's will to believe, um, where the idea is that we engage in this leap of faith about, those other minds exist. They're like my mind. I can, um, right. So your will to be interpreted comes down to your faith that what you say is actually communicable. We take these leaps of faith in communication. That's my provisional
Sure.
interpretation of this. But yeah.
It was I had to I'd already forgotten Korsgaard's name, that she's the
Hmm.
one who is about the hearkening and how we can't, even a dog, even an animal whining at you, like you understand that and you can't, that's like the primary mortal impetus, and you don't have to be in a willing relationship. But certainly you can harden yourself and say, I'm not going to interpret you. You are you, the Jews in the concentration camp, when I am the concentration camp guard,
Hmm.
are just going to be like the bleatings of sheep to me, and of no concern to me. So in that sense,
Yeah.
yes, but it's not it seems we are by default on the yes mode.
Hmm.
If then I'm worthy to be an interpreter at all, we three, you, my neighbor, whose mind I would fain interpret, you, my kindly listener, to whom I address my interpretation, we three constitute a community. Let us give to this sort of community a technical name. Let us call it a community of interpretation. The form of such a community is determinate. Our goal lies before us, one event towards which we direct all our efforts when we take part in this interpretation. This ideal event is a goal unattainable under human social conditions, but definable as an ideal in terms of the perfectly familiar experience which every successful comparison of ideas involves. It is a goal towards which we all may work together. You, when you give me the signs that I am to interpret, our neighbor, when he listens to my interpretation, I, when I devote myself to the task. I'm just going to keep, I know we're
Yeah. Keep
finishing
going.
up here. The goal, our individual experience of our successful comparisons of our own ideas, shows us wherein it consists, and that it is no goal which an abstract conception can define in terms of credit values, and that it is also no goal which a possible perception can render to me in the cache of any set of sensory data.
Okay.
Yet it,
This he's criticizing Jamesian pragmatism here. But yeah, keep going.
yep. Yet it is a goal which each of us can accept as his own. I can at present aim to approach that goal through plans, through hypotheses regarding you, which can be inductively tested. I can view that goal as a common future event. We can agree upon that goal. And herewith I interpret not only you as the being whom I am to interpret, but also myself as, in ideal, the interpreter who aims to approach the vision of the unity of precisely this community. And you and my other neighbor to whom I address my interpretation can also interpret yourselves accordingly.
I think he wasn't, from what I understand from background reading, I don't think he was a fan of Peirce's idea of truth as the ideal limit of investigation, right? What we would find out if we could complete an investigation. So, or the Jamesian version is more crude, where it comes down to usefulness, right? Credit values, I think, is what he's saying there. Or you could think of it cashing out a sensory data in a right to cash it out. Um, that has to do with this pragmatist conception here. So even though I think he's interpreted as being a pragmatist of a sort, he was critical of this conception of truth. I think he wants to have a more traditional conception of truth.
Yeah, I had focused on the community aspect of Peirce's definition of truth there, and had read that into Royce, that the scientists are engaged in this, and just as for Royce, the ideal community is one that includes everybody and includes goodwill among everybody. For the scientist, it's everybody is working toward this. Of course, any given population of scientists, whatever they're working toward, some external jackass on the internet who doesn't know anything about it is going to say that's all bullshit. You know, for the climate scientists engaged in earnest with each other. But it is so. There's a lot of idealism in the scientific endeavor. But I guess his objection is that it does sound like a very abstract, right? Certainly the scientist himself is not engaged in this love of other scientists and wanting to interpret them in a way that they together reach the truth. It's nothing like that. It is aimed toward this very abstract notion of truth. Uh, and this whole idea of, if this community were to exist, at least that was my objection to Peirce in the first place. It sounds very abstract. He seems to want to locate this as something that you are actively participating in, that you are feeling this where we want to understand each other. We want to be working toward this common goal of goodness and truth and all that.
Yeah, I think he's if he's, as I'm speculating, communicating to James a little bit here. I think he's saying, look, if you, with your will to believe, if you think that the God question is empirically can't be settled, but that we can believe for pragmatic purposes, then why not believe in truth? And why not believe in other minds in the same way? And we don't need some fancy explanation of truth as being an ideal limit of a procedure or something like that. We just assume that there is such a thing as the truth in this very common sense way that James criticized, right? So if you remember, and James is very critical of the things in themselves, Kant's things in themselves, although quite influenced by Kantianism in a way, very, very critical of the correspondence theory of truth, all that stuff. It seems to me here he doesn't like the conclusions that James draws from all that, and yeah, we can continue to believe in things in themselves even if we can't know them. And other minds are part of that, right? So for Kant, right, other minds are quintessential. They're sort of the quintessential thing in itself. Anyway, so should we just finish up here?
I don't. I think that was actually a fine final
Okay.
paragraph. So when I was reviewing this, I was again waiting for a concert, and I and I was reading this on my phone because it was already downloaded to my phone. I didn't have good reception, and I kept going past this through the end of the lecture into lecture 13, the world of interpretation, and it wasn't getting any. Again, I was going very fast. I wasn't really paying enough attention that I would, if I was prepping for an episode. But I feel like we got enough out of what we just read, and we would have to read a lot more to get much more out of it. I
I
don't know.
Yeah. I want to
Yeah.
point out that when you said you meant to say when I was reviewing this, and you said when I was revering this,
Oh,
which is a very
okay.
apt Freudian slip, because revering and reviewing might be the same thing. It's kind of the upshot of this chapter. There's something faith. There's an element of faith that goes on interpretation. The other thing I just want to say is I was just looking at the very end of the section. He confirms my vague memory that this triadic relation he thinks exists, even when it's just two people. So
Okay.
yeah, in the very
Sounds
last
good.
sentence. But yeah,
So there's another 200 pages of this book, 200 plus pages. And of course, this is volume two. Uh, I could at least see it reads so fast. I could at least see, like, if you cared enough, actually getting through this whole thing.
All right.
Is
Yeah,
there
I'm
any,
game.
I mean,
I mean,
I'm not saying we're
the
going to do that on the show. I'm just saying, unlike being in time or something,
oh,
which
I
is
see.
so difficult on a sentence by sentence basis, like I've been thinking about actually doing a course of just teaching being in time for a whole semester because still you wouldn't get through the whole thing, but you would get through it enough of the distinct parts of it that you really get a good idea. And I feel like that I don't feel like Royce is attractive enough to me to ever want to do this. But I could at least see it like, if I got the audiobook of this, yeah, it's kind of like the second sex. I think I somehow figured out how to have my phone read that to me, and I got through like the whole thing, I think, even though it's like a monumental, because so much of it is just historical and it's very chatty and everyday. And I feel like this is kind of similar to that as opposed to, those big beefy books. Uh, I don't know. Are you interested enough to ever want to yourself, apart from any association with me, want to have explored to see what the end of this book is about, for instance?
No, I'm not. I wouldn't read it on my own. I'm too.
Uh,
The reading that I would do in my spare time involves psychoanalysis, probably. Yeah.
sure.
Um, but or well, let me just say this: that like a lot of the stuff we read now, because we've been doing it so long, is a form of review, right? It's I enjoyed Royce a lot, right? And it's a good impetus to thinking. But I enjoy my own thinking more than I do reading philosophy at this point. I
I
enjoy
think,
just sitting down and like reading a paragraph and then sitting there and thinking, let me think through some of this, right? I just find that to be more much more enjoyable than um, getting through one of these texts, because it's I've done it so many times now, and it is repetitious, right? I'm not having that same experience that I was having in college, where these were new ideas to me, and I was getting really, really excited by it.
well, that may say more about. I mean, it's interesting that you had that journey because I feel like that thing you're describing is what I started with. And when I was doing philosophy, because we had very different introductions to this. You had a very reverential, great books approach. I had a very, uh, you know, get that it's, yeah, I've always had the attitude. I think both of our attitudes are driving the way this podcast our podcasts are formulated of what you get out of it and what the listener gets out of it is maybe more important than what is in the text, right? That your mind is your mind. So yeah, I now my notes are mostly just cutting and pasting things from the text. And the equivalent, the digital equivalent of just writing, putting margins, uh, putting little markers in the margins of the physical book, which I've always been too scared to file my books to want to do. And plus, I don't find like during an episode, I don't know, some of those people, some of the professors would come in with the book with their like million little uh yellow notepads, stuck to
Yeah,
every possible quote that they might want to pull out. And I just find it easier to create my own parallel version and just work off that and then have the full book there when necessary.
yeah. I mean, I, as you know, I read twice, and on the second one,
Hmm.
I read all of these like on a e-ink reader, which synchronizes with my laptop, so I can just open it up as a PDF on my laptop, and then I get you know, a notes app out, and then I start summarizing on the reread, which for me is the only way I can retain and
Right.
comprehend. And I found this video online recently where there's this guy who he's a philosophy guy actually. He does these very high end videos, but his with like a virtual like chalkboard and stuff. But his um his method is to he puts his summaries in the margins of the book he's reading. So he'll do a one sentence summary for each paragraph, but then also with each paragraph, there's two sentences next to each paragraph because there's a one sentence summary of the existing paragraph, and then a one sentence summary of everything that's come before. So you trying to always condense down into one sentence. And he says this was the key to his success as a philosophy professor. I've never been that radical, but because I don't like to stop during the reading, I like to just absorb it and then come back to it and be active on the second pass. But yeah,
Sure. I, of course, there's a lot of relations in what we read to what we've read before, but I feel like I'm very much on the lookout for what is new and distinctive, and that there is something. I mean, this is a weird guy. Royce is a uniquely weird guy, but we've read lots of them. And I don't let it, I'm very careful to, even if it reminds me of some idea that I've had a million times before or something that I feel like I've read again and again in other sources, I try to resist that subroutine just sort of kicking in and my just reading it through that lens. I want to try to retain, interpret them as maybe more strange and profound and original than they actually are. that's that's
well,
how
no,
I
I mean, I
continue to get
think
value out of the stuff.
yeah, no, I mean, I was excited by Royce in the.
Hmm.
It got a little bit repetitious, but um, his argument that communities have their own minds and all that stuff, and I, so I was quite excited and recommending it to other people. But yeah, as I got into it, I'm like, yeah, well, this is after I'm done with this episode, I'm not going to be returning to it. But yeah, it is its own thing. And when I'm doing the subroutine thing, it's just to try. Generally, I'm trying to relate it to the history of philosophy, and especially to if I think that they're in dialogue with the
Sure.
history, it's my way of understanding it. But anyway, yeah, I guess we're over time here.
Yep. Yep. Let's wrap. We'll have much more time for freeforming on our freeform coming up. So on our thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Go check out closereadsphilosophy.com, or better yet, partiallyexaminedlife.com, which will include all the public episodes. Or better yet than that, patreon.com/closereadsphilosophy to get the ad-free versions and subsequent parts of not this discussion, but many other discussions. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.